Back to the wolf issue, 43 Michigan wolves will be targeted by 1,200 licensed hunters this weekend. One of the biggest catalysts for the hunt was the growing number of livestock depredations over the past 3 years. But as ABC 10's Rick Tarsitano tells us, one farm in particular is the driving force behind that rising trend.
This particular episode started in August the 7th.
When Nancy and Al Warren's FOIA request was finally granted after months of emailing back and forth, they studied each individual depredation dating back to 1996. One farm in particular stuck out. It ended up being just a few miles down the road. Since 2010, 96 of the 149 head of cattle that have been attacked by wolves have taken place here on a farm owned by John Koski. But, much like today, there's no human presence to be found and nobody lives on the property, which could be one of the biggest causes of the depredations.
When I was here last, about a week ago, he had about 50 head, I counted, out here, just in this swale.
Nobody living there with the normal day-to-day in and out, lights going on, your farm dog barking, and all the other things that go along with somebody living there. It does make it difficult, to control wolf issues there because nobody's there.
The DNR did their best to fill the gap with non-lethal and lethal remedies found in the wolf management plan.
I mean, I've hung flashing lights there myself. We've used cracker shells there. We've used range guards there. We've used donkeys. We've used electric fence. We've used a whole suite of non-lethals and lethal things. We still got the depredation.
They also used temporary fencing.
However, that fencing that cost over $1,300 has disappeared.
They're looking at this fence. They don't even know what the fence was really for. This was a fence actually that was used in the springtime, right when he was calving, and it was a temporary fence. It wasn't meant to be a permanent fence. As far as I know, he could have it wrapped up and be willing to use it again.
But each remedy came with a clause.
Whatever non-lethal technique we put in place, they're responsible to maintain it for 3 years. Otherwise, in the agreement they signed, there's a step down that they have to reimburse the state.
Oh, but yeah, that's some more there.
While the $1,300 in fencing was only a temporary measure for calving periods and subject to use, the donkeys, whose cost and vet fees totaled more than $2,500, went neglected, compromising their intended effect.
According to the report that I saw, it appears they may have died from dehydration. He also has been known to have dead cattle laying around his farm. Dead cattle is an attractant for wolves.
I don't want to defend him. I'm not going to say what he did there was perfect, but the more important thing there is what he did there wasn't breaking the law. Until we were notified of actual carcasses being left laying, that's when he crossed the line. That's when we called MDA, Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. They moved in, corrective action was taken, and those animals were cleaned up. The donkeys aside, that's a totally separate issue, and that's up to Ontonagon County prosecutors. What they may do with that information, I don't know.
It wasn't until a few weeks ago that they started to do anything. But it's interesting to note that Koski has received close to $33,000 in compensation for all of his lost livestock. That's 82% of all compensation paid out in the entire state.
You know what I liken it to is a perfect storm. We had wolves for many years where we could do no lethal control. We had his farming practices that, weren't best conducive and where you have large predators that eat livestock. And so there were years and probably generations of wolves that learned to use livestock as a food source.
But with little to no human presence on the farm, it was difficult to correct the problem wolves promptly.
When there is a problem, we need to direct the problem toward the offending wolf and remove that wolf from the population. In many cases, most cases, the depredation stopped.
There is an inherent risk to dogs allowed to range in areas frequented by wolves.
We'll examine those cases and the reports of the contrary that led to the hunt in our final installment. For ABC 10 and CW5, I'm Rick Tarsitano.